Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was used to moving fast. In fact, she didn't remember the last time she had a slow morning. That Thursday wasn't supposed to be any different. She had just come off a relentless 3-week stretch. Committee. Hearings in Sacramento. A roundtable in San Antonio. A late-night town hall in Tulsa. Her carry-on had barely seen the inside of a closet. But today wasn't about policy votes or press briefings. Today was about family. Devin, her cousin, was gone. 42. Liver failure. Jasmine had grown up with him like a sibling. Summers in the same backyard. Laughter echoing off porch steps. Secrets shared under dim streetlights. She hadn't even cried yet. There hadn't been time. All she knew was that she needed to get to Jackson, Mississippi, in time to say goodbye. It was just past 6:30 a.m. when she walked into Dallas Love Field Airport, hair pulled back, black dress, under her blazer, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, scanning emails like always. Her flight was set to board at 7:10. Plenty of time, she thought. But grief has a way of distorting time, and so does bias. The first sign came with a glance, a flicker, really. The agent at the check-in desk looked up from his screen, met her, eyes for a second too long, then looked back down with a smirk that wasn't quite professional. Jasmine handed over her boarding pass and ID without hesitation. "Flight 2376 to Jackson," she said. "I'd like to check my carry-on." The agent frowned. "You're not in the system," he replied. It wasn't the words, it was the tone. Jasmine stayed calm, showed him her phone. "I checked in an hour ago. The pass is right here." But it wasn't enough. "There's been a change," he said. "Your seat's been reassigned. You'll have to wait." Before she could respond, a second employee was called over. No eye contact, just protocol. "She's flagged for random review," the woman said. Jasmine blinked. "Excuse me? It's routine." But it wasn't. She'd flown this route 4 times this year. Nothing about this felt routine. The tension in the air thickened, and when she asked to speak to a supervisor, the first agent waved a hand and said, "Security, please." That's when the stillness started. Not fear, not outrage, just silence. Jasmine stood there, jaw tight, arms folded, watching everything unfold in slow motion. People whispered. Someone pointed. A phone rose quietly. A voice said, "That's Congresswoman Crockett." But the staff didn't seem to care. What followed was not a confrontation. It was a decision. Quiet, deliberate, and wrong. And while Jasmine didn't know it yet, the moment she was pulled from the line, detained, and treated like a threat wasn't the end of the story. It was the start, because the next person who walked through that door was her husband. And everything was about to change. It was a sentence Jasmine Crockett had heard in other forms all her life. Just not like this. Not today. She'd barely had time to process her cousin's death, let alone grieve it. Devin was only 42, liver failure, a funeral in Jackson, Mississippi. A family waiting, a promise made. Jasmine had flown across the country for countless committee hearings and town halls, but this was personal. This time, it wasn't politics. It was blood. She arrived at Dallas Love Field a little after 6:30 a.m., dressed modestly in black. Nothing flashy, nothing political. Her phone buzzed with unread emails as she sipped lukewarm coffee, juggling grief with the mental rigor of her schedule. Her carry-on was light, but her heart wasn't. At the Southwest check-in counter, she handed over her ID and boarding pass without hesitation. "I'm on flight 2376 to Jackson. I'd like to check my carry-on." The words were automatic. The kind you say after 100 airports. The kind that shouldn't start a problem. But the agent behind the desk hesitated. That look. A flicker. The kind that disappears in a blink, but says everything it needs to. He glanced up at her, then down. Again back to his screen, then smirked. Jasmine had learned to read people long before she entered politics. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't procedure. This was dismissal, dressed in a uniform and hidden behind a keyboard. You're not in the system. he said, tapping his keyboard with indifference. That can't be right, Jasmine replied calmly. I checked in over an hour ago. The boarding pass is right here. She turned her phone around for him to see. He barely glanced. There's been a change. Your seat's been reassigned. To what? No answer. He waved over a second agent. That's when Jasmine's heart tapped faster. 6:43 a.m. 10 minutes until boarding. Time ticking louder than any announcement. I have a funeral to attend, she said, still composed. She's flagged for random review, the second agent said. Not even looking at her, random. Right. I've flown this route 4 times this year. This has never happened. Ma'am, the first agent interrupted, standing. If you don't calm down, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. Calm down. There it was. 2 words that women, especially black women, hear not as comfort, but as control. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't curse. She simply asked a question. That was enough. Please stand over there, the agent said, gesturing dismissively. Passengers nearby were now watching. One even whispered, That's Congresswoman Crockett. But recognition meant nothing in that moment. Jasmine stepped aside, not because she was told to, but because she understood what would happen if she didn't. She pulled out her government-issued ID, held it out. I'm on official travel. I'm not hiding anything. The agent didn't care. ID doesn't override protocol. The weight. Jasmine's stomach shifted. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't random. This was targeted. I'd like to speak to a supervisor, she said evenly. Instead, the agent nodded to someone behind the counter and muttered, Security, please. Jasmine blinked. She had done everything right, every step, and yet here she was, flagged, pulled aside, and now treated as a potential threat. TSA officers arrived, 2 of them. Their pace wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't neutral either. They approached with that in-between posture, the one that says, We've already decided what you are. Ma'am, we need you to come with us, one said. For what? She asked, standing her ground. Random review. I've already checked in. I'm traveling for official government business. This is my badge. This is my boarding pass. There's no issue here, except the one you're creating. No reply. Just, Ma'am, please, we're not asking. There. It was again, the quiet threat, the silent line between compliance and consequence. Jasmine glanced at the gate. Her flight was still boarding. She thought of her mother waiting in Jackson. She thought of Devon's little girl who asked if Auntie Jazz would say something at the service. She thought of the promise. And then she walked. Not out of submission, but strategy. The TSA officers led her through a side door near the gate. The hallway was cold. Fluorescent lights flickered. The floor hummed with that echo of institutional power. One of them whispered to a third agent down the corridor. We'll need to do a full pat-down, one said. And screen your bag. No warrant. No probable cause. No explanation, Jasmine said softly. You're walking a line you weren't. Trained to cross. You can file a complaint later, the agent said without looking at her. She didn't argue. She stood still, arms out. The sound of latex gloves snapping punctuated the silence. Her carry-on was opened. Toiletries examined. Paperwork shuffled. Nothing explained. Minutes dragged. 10. 15. 20. No one looked her in the eye. Finally, she broke the silence. Can someone please explain the reassignment? Why I was pulled? Ma'am, I don't handle seating. That's airline, one officer said. Then why was I pulled? You were being difficult. Jasmine blinked. I asked a question. I didn't yell. I complied with everything. The officer shrugged. We respond to what we're told. That's our job. She looked at the clock. 16. The plane was gone. The funeral? Gone. She sat in a cold metal chair, fingers resting on her knees, breath slow and deep. She wasn't just missing a flight anymore. She was missing a goodbye. They were punishing her not for what she did, but for who she was, and how confidently she carried it. A few feet away, the two TSA officers whispered among themselves. Her bag, half-zipped, still lay open. She zipped it herself, slowly, deliberately. Her blazer was wrinkled. Her hair had fallen in soft curls. She looked composed. But inside, there was a fire. The young airline agent, the one who had smirked at her, stood at the end of the hallway now, arms crossed, not speaking, not even pretending to be busy. At 7:36 a.m., the automatic doors slid open again, and everything changed. Reflection and emotional depth in this incident. Jasmine's strength was not in how loud she could have gotten, but in how still she chose to remain. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was a calculated form of protest. Every refusal to escalate mirrored the years she'd spent learning how power works. Not in volume, but in precision. What made the scene so powerful wasn't just how the airport staff behaved. It was how she responded. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. She didn't beg. She stood. She made the humiliation visible, undeniable, and, crucially, witnessed. The surrounding passengers saw her. Some filmed, some whispered. One mouthed, "I'm sorry," because they knew. Maybe they had been in that same spot once. Maybe they'd watched their mother, sister, or wife get treated that same way. With suspicion, with disdain, with invisible, systemic contempt. And in Jasmine, they saw something most people never get to see in real time. What it looks like when the person being dismissed is someone with power, but chooses not to wield it. Violently. It was dignity without demand, grace under pressure. But it shouldn't have had to come to that. Jasmine Crockett sat in a molded metal chair against the wall, staring at nothing and everything all at once. The hum of overhead lights sounded louder than it should have. Her hands rested on her knees. Her jaw was tight. The badge in her purse no longer mattered. Her seat was gone, her flight had left, and her dignity had been chipped at piece by people who didn't even care enough to know who she was. She'd asked one question. She'd followed every instruction. But in the world she lived in, sometimes that's all it took to be labeled difficult. At 7:41 a.m., her phone buzzed once. She looked at it only to send one message. "I was pulled. I missed the flight. I need you here." She hit send, and then she waited. Across town, Franklin Rhodes was already pulling into the parking lot. He hadn't planned to come inside. Jasmine had told him not to. "It's a short flight," she'd said. "I'll be fine." But the tone in her text carried weight. She rarely said need. She almost never said now. Franklin was a man built on composure. 30 years as a federal judge had taught him the art of saying little and meaning everything. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The moment he stepped inside the terminal, the air changed. It was subtle, but undeniable. Gray wool, coat, pressed slacks, a maroon scarf his wife had gifted him last Christmas. He didn't march. He walked, slowly, purposefully, like a man who knew the weight of his presence. He moved past security without pause, his ID still in his inside pocket, never needing to be shown. And when Jasmine saw him, she didn't smile. She stood, straightened her posture, met his eyes, and gave him the briefest nod. She didn't have to say a word. He understood. Franklin turned to the nearest TSA officer. "Who's in charge here?" The officer, clearly startled, hesitated. "Sir, may I ask who you are?" "I'm Franklin Rhodes, retired federal judge. Ninth Circuit. Who's in charge?" That name landed like a thunderclap. The officer blinked. One moment," and disappeared behind a door. Franklin turned to Jasmine. "What happened?" "I asked about a change in my seat. They called. Disruptive. I showed ID. I complied. They still pulled me. I missed the flight." "Did you raise your voice?" "No." "Did you resist?" "No." When the officer returned, he brought someone new, a supervisor wearing a Navy lanyard and a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt, the kind of person who spent more time writing reports than enforcing rules. He extended a hand halfway. "Judge Rhodes, we weren't aware of—" Franklin didn't take the hand. Why was my wife's seat reassigned? I'd have to check with the gate, then check. The supervisor nodded and hurried off. Franklin turned next to the desk, the one Jasmine had stood at less than an hour earlier. The same young man was there. The same smirk had now vanished. In its place was a pale, rigid mask of discomfort. "You," Franklin said evenly. "What was your reason for calling security?" She wouldn't stand down. She asked why her seat was changed. Yes, but... Did she shout? No. Did she threaten anyone? No. Franklin leaned in slightly, just enough. Not enough to be aggressive, but enough to take the oxygen out of the room. Then you understand you escalated a peaceful exchange into a security incident, that you ignored a valid federal ID, that you detained a sitting congresswoman without probable cause. That's targeted escalation, and you're going to have to explain it. The agent swallowed hard. I didn't know who she was. It shouldn't matter, Franklin said. And it didn't, that was the point. A beat of silence passed. It hummed in the air like static before a storm. Then another person entered the scene. Someone who had missed the beginning but could smell the fallout. Another agent, another badge. The whispering began again. The apologies followed. "Ma'am, we deeply regret that—" "No," Franklin interrupted. "She doesn't need an apology. She needed dignity. 20 minutes ago. They were too late." The story had already left the building. Franklin's tone never rose, his voice never cracked, but the weight behind his words was unmistakable. A gate manager showed up, clipboard in hand, breathless, eyes darting between everyone like he was looking for someone to blame or hide behind. "Judge Rhodes, Congresswoman Crockett, Save it," Franklin said. "We're not interested in your introductions. I'm here to facilitate. I want a name." "Excuse me?" "The name of the person who called security. The person who decided my wife was a threat for asking about a boarding." That's a personnel matter." Franklin stepped forward. "So is discrimination." The manager's breath caught. "I understand this is serious." "No, you don't," Franklin said. "You're reacting. You're not understanding." More silence. By now, the TSA officers had moved to the background. The agent who initially dismissed Jasmine had vanished, likely ducked into some break room down the terminal, hiding from the wreckage. Jasmine hadn't spoken once since Franklin arrived. She didn't need to. She watched, still but not quiet. She was letting them flail, letting them dig. "You turned a minor question into a major incident," Franklin continued. "You dismissed her badge, ignored her credentials, blocked her from attending a funeral, and you did it all under the assumption that your power went unchecked. I'll speak with our regional supervisor. You'll do more than that. There will be a full internal review." Jasmine finally broke her silence. "Don't launch a review because he's here," she said. Her voice was sharper than before. "You should have launched it the moment I was pulled." The air around her vibrated. There was no shouting. Just precision and regret, because everyone watching now knew. They had picked the wrong person on the wrong day, with the wrong assumptions. "You've cost her a funeral," Franklin added, his voice soft. "That can't be undone. But you will issue a public apology, not just to her, but to everyone this has happened to." The manager opened his mouth, thought better of it, closed it again. Jasmine leaned slightly, looking him in the eye. "And don't spin this," she said. "Don't say there was confusion. Don't say protocol. This was judgment. Yours." Around them, passengers had gathered, discreet but present. Someone was filming. Someone else whispered, "That's her," from the video. The internet was already ahead of them. By the time they walked out of the terminal, without a security escort, without a hasty offer for first class, the moment had crystallized, and the reckoning had begun. Themes of power and exposure. What made Franklin's entrance powerful wasn't just his title. It was the way he wielded it, not as a threat but as a spotlight. He didn't need to yell. He knew that real authority doesn't panic. It doesn't posture. It simply arrives, and when it does, it changes the stakes. But this wasn't just about titles. It was about assumptions, about who gets believed, about who gets dismissed. Jasmine had shown restraint under pressure. Franklin had delivered precision under fire. Together, they turned a moment of humiliation into one of revelation. And now the world was watching. By the time Jasmine and Franklin walked into the parking lot of Dallas Love Field, the fire that had simmered beneath Jasmine's calm had turned cold. Her fingers tightened on the handle of her suitcase, but she didn't keep walking. Not toward the car. Not yet. Franklin stood next to her, eyes fixed on the terminal doors like they still owed him something. An explanation, a reckoning, an ounce of the respect that had been so casually denied inside. They didn't expect me to show up, he said after a long silence. His voice was quiet but certain. Jasmine didn't look at him. They didn't expect anyone to care. That was the part that burned. It wasn't just the mistreatment. It was the assumption that no one would notice, that no one would say anything, that her silence, her stillness, would be mistaken for submission instead of self-control. Franklin turned toward her, reading something deeper in her expression. "You okay?" Jasmine gave a small nod. Not the kind that means yes, the kind that means I will be eventually. She didn't check her phone until they got to the car, but when she did, the screen lit up with missed calls, unread messages, and notifications from people she hadn't spoken to in months. A staffer in D.C. had forwarded her a journalist's inquiry. Another message from her aunt in Jackson simply read, "He would have been proud of you, Jazz. Don't let them make you small." Jasmine didn't respond. She just stared at the screen, then locked it. She'd missed the funeral. There was no fixing that. The seat she was supposed to sit in was gone. So was the final goodbye she owed her cousin. And that was what stayed. Inside the airport, the ripple had begun. The videos passengers had filmed were already online. One showed Jasmine standing still, arms at her sides, surrounded by TSA officers who refused to meet her gaze. Another caught Franklin mid-sentence, calmly demanding accountability. None of it was dramatic, but that was what made it cut deeper. The quietness of it, the chill in the way she'd been handled, the assumptions, casual, instinctive, that had led to the escalation. It wasn't just humiliating. It was familiar, and that was what struck a nerve. In a break room tucked behind the southwest counter, the young gate agent sat slumped in a plastic chair, his name tag, Cullen, crooked, on his chest. His hands were clasped together, his foot tapping nervously against the linoleum floor. The manager stood nearby, arms crossed. "You could have just moved her to a new seat," he said. "That's all she asked." "I didn't know who she was," Cullen muttered. "You don't get to treat people like that. Doesn't matter who she is, you thought she was being difficult. She asked a question. That's not a crime." The room fell silent. Cullen looked down, shame slowly rising up through him like water seeping into a sinking boat. He hadn't just made a mistake. He'd made it in front of the entire internet, and the woman he tried to dismiss had stood taller than he'd expected, stronger, calmer, and very, very visible. Back at their hotel in Jackson, Jasmine sat on the edge of the bed, still in the same black dress. The memorial had already ended. Her family had sent photos, her mother smiling through tears, cousins standing in the church foyer, Devon's daughter holding the small speech Jasmine was supposed to deliver. "I told her Auntie Jazz wrote it," her sister had texted. "She asked me to read it out loud." Jasmine stared at the message. She didn't cry. She didn't move. Franklin had gone downstairs to take a few calls. There were people in Washington wanting statements. Media requests were piling up. But Jasmine didn't want to become the headline. Not really. She didn't want her face to be a symbol for another viral outrage. She wanted to talk, not to perform. She wanted the humanity, not the spectacle. Instead of speaking, she wrote. The letter it wasn't a press release, wasn't curated by a publicist. It was a letter, hand-typed by Jasmine herself, published the next day by 3 local newspapers and picked up within hours by national outlets. In it, she wrote, "This isn't just about Gate 22B. It's not just about an airline or a boarding pass. It's about how quickly someone in uniform or behind a desk can decide that your presence is a problem. It's about how easily your voice can be silenced when it doesn't come wrapped in pedigree or power, and it's about how dignity isn't something to be granted. It's something we all deserve automatically, without asking. The final paragraph was the one that got quoted everywhere. So no, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I didn't escalate. I simply stood still and let the world see what happens when someone who belongs is treated like they don't. The response. The comments came in waves, some angry, some heartbroken, many familiar. A schoolteacher wrote, "This happened to me last year. I asked about a delayed flight. I got escorted out." A veteran wrote, "My father missed his surgery because TSA held him without reason. I never got to say goodbye." A young woman from Arizona posted, "They talked to me like I was nothing. I didn't fight back. I just cried in the bathroom." People weren't just angry on Jasmine's behalf. They were recognized by what happened to her because it wasn't new. It was just finally visible, and it wasn't about race alone, or gender alone, or status alone. It was about the power some people think they have and the people they believe don't. The Southwest Airlines PR team scrambled. At first, a generic apology was posted. "We regret the incident involving Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and are reviewing our procedures to ensure all customers are treated with respect and professionalism." No names, no responsibility. Just the polished phrasing of a company trying to stay on the right side of headlines without actually stepping into the discomfort of accountability. But by then, the damage was done. The videos had more views than the airline statement. The hashtags were trending. The story was no longer just about Jasmine. It was about everyone who had ever stood at a counter, ticket in hand, credentials in order, and still been told, "Step aside." Later that week, Jasmine returned to D.C. She declined interviews on the morning shows. She didn't want her face on banners, her story reduced to a meme. She wanted the story to be about people, not performance. Instead, she sat with a group of interns, young, wide-eyed, hopeful, and listened. One of them, a 19-year-old from Kansas, said softly, "I saw the video. I've been treated like that before. You didn't yell, but you made it loud." That stayed with Jasmine. Sometimes stillness is the loudest sound in the room. Sometimes silence forces people to look, because what happened at Gate 22B wasn't rare. It was just captured, and Jasmine didn't need to scream to be heard. She simply refused to disappear. Later that evening, Jasmine sat alone on a bench outside Union Station. The city buzzed quietly around her, headlights slipping down wet pavement, the steady hum of trains arriving and departing, voices rising and fading as people hurried past, with bags and purpose. No one stopped her. No one recognized her, and she was grateful for that. She needed a moment not as a congresswoman, not as a headline, not as the woman from the airport video, but as herself, a tired, hurting woman who had just tried to go to a funeral. Nothing more, nothing less. She scrolled through her phone without really reading anything. News outlets had moved on to the next scandal. The story was no longer at the top of the feed, but the comments hadn't stopped. Neither had the emails or the handwritten letters, yes, real ones, that had begun arriving at her office. Some from strangers, some from other public servants. Many from people with no platform but a whole lifetime of stories that sounded all too familiar. Jasmine closed her eyes. She could still see the gate agent's smirk. She could still feel the ergo still when Franklin asked for a name. She could still hear her cousin's daughter's voice in that text. She asked if Auntie Jazz would say something. She never got to say it. But maybe now she was, because something had shifted. Not in the airline, not in the TSA protocol, not yet, but in the people watching, the ones who saw themselves in her, who saw the way power had dismissed her, and saw the strength in how she didn't flinch. And maybe, just maybe, they'd remember that moment the next time someone else was being ignored. The next time a woman at a gate was asked to calm down for simply asking a question. The next time a man of color was randomly selected for further screening. The next time someone behind a desk forgot that dignity doesn't have to be earned, it's a right. Franklin had said it best the night they got back home. Real power is knowing who you are and not letting anyone take that away, even when they try. Jasmine breathed deep and stood. Her train was boarding soon. Another meeting, another room, another speech. But before she stepped away, she opened her notes app and typed a single line. The next town hall starts with a story. Not about legislation, about people, about what it feels like to be unseen and the courage it takes to stand still and say, I belong. This isn't the end of the story. Because what happened at Gate 22B wasn't just one woman's moment. It was mirror. And in the next episode, we're going to look at who was watching and what happened when they decided to act. So stay tuned, because Stillness speaks, and the world is finally listening.